Welcome biologists and welcome to this session on variation and factors that influence variation. So we need to know first of all the types of variation that we've got. We've got first of all interspecific variation, which is the differences between two different species. So for example, the human and the lion species, the differences between those. We've got intraspecific variation, which is differences and similarities between members of the same species. So for example, differences between individuals of the human population. Now, variation can result from either genetic or the influence of the environment, and this can produce either continuous or discontinuous variation. So, for example, human blood type is only determined by one gene, so it's monogenetic and no influence of the environment on human blood type. However, continuous variation is normally caused by multiple genes, for example, polygenetic, and the environment working together. So, for example, height and mass of the organism. Now, you need to know the certain characteristics that determine the discontinuous and continuous variation from looking at data. So, for example, continuous variation within a population can either be done by a histogram. It can be presented as a histogram, so all of these points are touching. So it's either by a histogram or a line graph. And there are no distinct categories within height. So, for example, we're not talking about, for example, blue, black, and green. It's continuous. There are no distinct categories. This means that I can get data in between 2 points. So, for example, someone could be 154 centimetres, 0.5. So it's that 0.5. There are no distinct categories. It's a continuous variation. This means they have intermediate values. We can also see here that the data is quantitative. So it's very much data-driven here. It's also, as I mentioned on the previous slide, polygenetic. It's influenced by many, many genes and the environment. So that's continuous variation. Discontinuous variation has distinct categories. So this is a bar chart represented on a bar chart. The bars are not touching. It's not a histogram, it's a bar chart. And as you can see, I've got distinct categories. There are no intermediates. So for example, I can't be halfway between A, B, and O. I'm either A, B, or I'm O. There are very distinct categories and there are no intermediate values. Now, as mentioned before, this is determined by a single gene. It's monogenetic without any environmental influence on discontinuous variation. So those points that have been in red on these different slides, these are taken directly from the mark scheme and you need to know them. So there's a couple of points here just to get you thinking about what you think might be considered as a genetic or environmental variation. So if you want to pause it and have a go, I'll show the answers in a second. So these couple of things coming up here. So environment is things, for example, religion. So for example, depending upon where you're born, sometimes will determine your religion, and which family you're born into will determine your religion. Education, again, environmental factors influencing that. The ones in the middle, the ones that we need to be aware of here, height, and obviously genetics on this side. Okay, so diet in animals. This one is very heavily influenced by genetics and the environment. It's a mixture of both. It's really important here as well that you're talking about mass of the organism that's changing. So diet in animals is an example of continuous variation because it has both genetics and environmental factors. Etiolation is another one in plants that we need to be aware of, and that's where we get elongation of the stem in between these nodes. Now, the reason why a plant will do this is to reach the sunlight. So this is normally occurs in plants in shaded areas as they're trying to reach up towards those the light in those higher places. Another one that we need to be aware of is chlorosis, and this is why grass goes pale, for example, after you take a tent down. Now, the reason it does this is because the plant, in this case the grass, has not been making chlorophyll because it doesn't want to waste its energy and its resources to make chlorophyll to capture light if there is no light to capture if the grass has been covered. There are other reasons as to why the plant might not produce chlorophyll, but in this particular reason, that's what we need to know in terms of it's been covered up, it doesn't want to waste its resources making that chlorophyll. Okay, so that's this top point here about the different types of variation and what influences it. We're just going to quickly recap on the meiosis side of it and how sexual reproduction can lead to genetic variation. So we have crossing over in prophase 1, we have independent assortment in metaphase 1 and 2, and we also have random fertilation of gametes. If you're not too sure on them, go back, revisit meiosis to refresh your memory. But guys, we've covered those 2 specification points. Good luck in your exams.